management is often overlooked. So this is how circularity among the cause and effect and system that we call complex system that we need to train ourselves in development planning. So applying more systems thinking in the development planning, and UNDP is supporting many countries on that. Second point is also very important. If you look at our Human Development Report of 2020, that's on Anthropocene, New Frontier, or development at the age of Anthropocene. I think that's very important to look at what has been changed. Two things has been changed. Earlier Human Development Index, which determine a country's position, and my colleague from Bhutan has mentioned Bhutan's position at the very forefront because of its investment on environmental conservation, and Bhutan is a champion of the earth. Two things has been changed. One is two new indicators. One is the country's carbon dioxide emission and material footprint. So moment you have a planetary adjusted index, the human development has changed. Many of the countries used to be on the top, gone down now. I'm not naming it. So development is redefined, and we need to support that. That is what UNDP is doing, working with the government to make sure that the planetary adjusted, or the impact of our development on planetary system is also taken care of. And it is not just managing the risk, it is more about doing development differently. That's how I will stop for the time being. Over to you, Anupama.
Thank you, Mr. Khurshid. And thank you for bringing up the environment adjusted development in this, because that's something also that we've been discussing in our center. And it's good to know that that's also an integrated part of conversations at the UNDP, because that will go on and influence just global discussions. And we're excited to learn about countries that perform well in these kind of indicators, which also take into account planetary boundaries and planetary effects, to see how they're doing things differently and if we can scale those up in different cases. But moving on to Mr. Purna, another perspective from Bhutan.
Yeah, so I think again, I will talk in two aspects: local, firstly, as to giving a focus to Bhutan. Cross-sectoral collaboration in Bhutan is such that it's again governed by gross national happiness. So any kind of activity, any development policy, any development activity, projects, all need to go through a kind of screening process, which they call it as the GNH screening tool, So that will take care of all the sectors being brought together, and then the screening process is very objectively made, and it tries to screen projects and policies and through this sustainable development targets, So therefore, if a project need to be qualified to be started or not, need to go through this. So this is a local aspect, in our country, in Bhutan particularly. This is how the collaboration, cross-sectoral, things happen. So that's probably as Dr. Khurshid was trying to say, we are doing quite good, I should say. But in terms of collaboration in South Asia, in a global level, not local, but broadly, usually we tend to fail. Probably there is a political aspect in it, or some other aspects, which is not making the collaboration that conducive, So, for example, we had one committee called SARC, South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, which at least I wanted to believe that it's not that functional these days, probably these are all political or other reasons as to why these sectors are not working well. Uh, but of course, so that is regional kind of problem. But in a global problem like UN, UNDP, they are doing pretty good, especially in Bhutan's development. UNDP or uh, World Bank, these are doing a lot of support and assistance in our country. So, of course, this cross-sectoral, especially in South Asia, is needed. I do not know where we can strike so that things get better. Uh, but yeah, I'd like to end here.
Thank you, Mr. Purna. Yes, regional cooperation tends to be a bit of a challenge in almost any part of the world, really. Um, and thank you for your answer. We would definitely like to learn more about, the way that the Bhutanese bureaucracy works with regards to cross-sectoral collaboration between departments. But moving on to Mr. Sundar from India, which, being such a large country and him having worked now with the state government and also earlier with the Niti Aayog, which was the nodal agencies for SDGs in India, maybe we'd like to learn more about how this sort of collaboration works at a much larger scale in between states as well as at the national level. If you could tell us a little bit about that.
Thanks, Anupama. And actually, a very important question. We do remain fragmented in within the sectoral boundaries, and that happens across institutions, across regions, and all that. But there is a conscious attempt to break out, and let me talk about certain. I mean, bring certain aspects of these efforts in the from the Indian side. Over the last 3-4 years, there has been a lot of breakthroughs which has happened in terms of intergovernmental collaboration. Intergovernmental, basically, I'm using it as a kind of functional term here. The working with between the central government and the state governments and the local governments, that has become much more functional. A lot of things are happening actually on that over the last 3-4 years. One area is basically, in terms of, agreeing on different indices for different goals and targets and measuring progress. So this is something which has actually very significantly progressed. I mean, from Niti Aayog side at the national level to different states and union territories, and also civil society, and in some from certain points of view, local governments also chipping in. So this is a lot of progress which has happened on this. So I mean, a lot of common understanding has been generated in terms of how to understand different goals and targets, and how to develop indices and how to generate data. So that is something, I mean, data is a single aspect which has seen a lot of progress over the last several 3-4 years. And that is not to say that we don't need progress. Actually we need a lot more. But I mean, if you look from 2017-18 and look at the current situation, there is a lot of progress which has happened. So at this point of time, there is a kind of if you would like to have a kind of snapshot of progress, I mean, local to country level, there are snapshots available. You might actually have pickup calls with certain parts of them, but there is something available, and this is progressively being built up. So that is one aspect. The other thing is in terms of bringing in corrective action. How we actually act on different targets and goals. On that also, relooking of programs and schemes, which are the major handles of the government all across the world to work on the SDGs. On that also, a lot of progress has happened in terms of understanding programs, understanding metrics and tools which can be used to monitor and make the programs effective, build up accountability of different structures which are part of this implementation system, and improving monitoring, so those aspects have also improved quite a lot. And knowledge co-production in terms of developing documents, developing tools and techniques, and shared understanding. There are a lot of things. I mean, a lot of progress has happened. And then across sector, like speaking from the, I mean, coming from the government to other sectoral, players. For instance, we talked about the private sector. I mean, our friend from the Mauritius actually wanted to focus on that. So there are also a lot of good things which have happened in terms of connectivity between the private sector and the government, and also the connectivity between the private sector and the civil society and community-based organization and things like that. I mean, I would not say it's very advanced, but we have a lot of progressive signs which are there. And there is a very dynamic reporting framework now from the business side, which speak to the SDGs much more closely. So we know actually at least the big businesses and medium-sized businesses, how they are actually moving on the SDGs. And a lot of strategies have been developed by different organizations. We have some business sector organizations really doing well in terms of, bringing themselves, higher in terms of responsibility towards SDGs. So, and I mean, they have actually tried to move from a corporate social responsibility to a socially responsible business. So those tracks you can see in certain parts of the business sector, and it's increasingly being taken up by more people, and we need to go in that direction. The other part is in terms of knowledge production. I mean, bringing in academia and research institutions into the track, and because we have a lot of areas in which we need research-led interventions, in climate change, even in poverty alleviation, which can actually positively look at the trade-offs in terms of decoupling the environmental downsides and all that. So those areas also we need a lot of research-led intervention. I think we are quite, in fancy at that from that perspective. A lot needs to happen. We need to have a lot of engagement from the different research organizations, universities, and all that. So that conversation need to be much more thicker and much more dynamic. I think we are probably moving in that direction. The last part I will talk about is basically how we bring in community organizations. I'll talk about much more in my next this thing. But just to mention how, because communities are all across, and they are very diverse, and how we relate to them, because ultimately a lot of things are going to happen there. So those areas, I mean, bit unsure at this point of time what kind of dialogue can happen, what kind of collaboration can happen. Those areas need to be looked at in a very goal focused way. So, and many more areas. So but these are the good things, and there are certain areas we need to work more. So let's go ahead and see how we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sundar. So you've presented a very holistic overview of what progress looks like at the moment with regards to cross-sectoral collaboration and different parts of achieving the SDGs between different stakeholders. Now we'll go on to Dr. Prajal. I'll go over Professor Sanjeev's answer later, perhaps, but yes, due to shortage of time, let's just skip over to Dr. Prajal.
Yeah, thank you. This question of cross-sectoral approach is really crucial for SDGs. Yeah, but the problem still is that our governance mechanism is more like a silo approach, and then it takes time to change all those bureaucracy which has a long history, and maybe we need to give some time there. In context of Nepal, we have National Planning Commission, which is looking at sustainable development goals, and this is also the apex body of Nepal, which is related to make plans and policies regarding developments. Like it also the body which also look at how the budget is distributed across the sector. So there is some sort of like a governing body, which is a center body, which is supposed to look at SDGs. But in terms of implementation, it's still the silos approach. And here I would like to bring back a bit more this discussion we made in terms of interactions. So when we talk about SDGs, we talk about interconnectivity, we talk about interactions, but the question is like, are we measuring those interactions as well? Because if we don't measure those interactions, talking is one thing, but looking at those interactions is a bit different. And when you look at different reports, different reports, different monitoring framework from different government, there is no indicator, or there is no clear messages coming up, like whether they are able to break away the trade-offs among SDGs. Because what we see is that it was mentioned that in SDG 12 there is a indicator on material footprint, and what we know from our previous development phases, like whenever a country has an economic growth or poverty elevation, it also increases the material footprint. Yeah. So are we? Are we looking at those trade-offs we are generating whenever we are getting like an economic and social well-being, we are deteriorating our environment, and there are these trade-offs, and the question is like how to break these trade-offs, and we have to look this a bit more in a holistic way, and there should be also indicators or processes that should be implemented to measure these trade-offs. But so far that is not there. That's not there. Not only at the country scale for certain country, but when we look at this global reports, for example, annual report coming from Sustainable Development Solution Network. Yeah, if you look at those reports, they don't talk about trade-offs and synergies. They don't talk about how countries are dealing with this trade-off, or whether there is whether these trade-offs are increasing or decreasing across time. And when we talk about implementing SDGs, what we need to resolve this trade-off. Otherwise, this trade-off will be very hard in terms of achieving all the goals by 2030.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Patel. That's a very interesting point. The question of trade-offs and synergies, that's not something that we've encountered as such very often yet. And that's an important point, especially for countries in this region that are still sort of are having to pick between different goals in terms of their development trajectory. So thank you for bringing that up. Mr. Mendri, we would like to have your response to the second question now.
Thank you, Anupama. So I think a lot of the things that I also wanted to actually highlight came out, from the presentations of other panelists. But looking at Sri Lanka as well, we've encountered a lot of difficulties, challenges in terms of fostering cross-sectoral collaboration, simply also because of the fact that our government, particularly government institutional structure, is deeply fragmented. We've inherited that, and then there have been several initiatives to actually look at how do you promote and institutionalize vertical and horizontal integration that is required for SDG driven planning, implementation and monitoring. So one of the initiatives was to establish a prime ministerial committee, a steering committee for cross-sectoral collaboration and particularly for vertical integration that is required. This is yet to actually develop into a broader mechanism where we could also facilitate horizontal integration that is needed. And also another challenge has been the partnerships, with non-government stakeholders, because governments tend to work in silos. And there had been several initiatives. Of course, these are quite ad hoc in nature, where there is broader engagement, and collaboration across sectors and across various levels of government and across different stakeholder groups in policy making, planning, and monitoring processes. Sometimes, these initiatives are donor driven, but in terms of actually institutionalizing that, it has been a challenge. And, but steps have been taken, through the Prime Ministerial Committee to look at to how to institutionalize cross-sectoral collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mandri. That's a good little tidbit from Sri Lanka, and the Sustainable Development Council is also the main nodal agency to look at monitoring progress of SDGs implementation there as well. So it's good to have your perspective there with regards to this. I think that ends the two questions that we had for our panelists, but we will have to be skipping the interactive discussion between panelists for the moment.